Hello, welcome to Gimpy's History Corner. I'm Gimpy. The name came from my grandsons, Archie and Ellis. Here we are at a Reds game with one of my son's friends from college and his kids. Archie's upset about something. I can't remember what it was, but it didn't last very long. Archie's a great kid, as is Ellis. And they like to go to Reds games with Gimpy. All right, this is video number 29, and it's Lincoln's War Strategy. And a lot of books. I have a lot of books on the Civil War. I'll just show you a few. This one's The Avenger Takes His Place. It's about Andrew Johnson becoming president after Lincoln's assassination and the turmoil he created. This is American Ulysses, Ulysses S. Grant, Civil War general and president, Ronald White. And this is a 2-volume narrative of the Civil War by Shelby Foote. The two big ones. There's actually 3. I've never bought the third one. I made my way through the first 2. And it's well written. I just never got around to buying the 3rd volume. I'm not sure why I didn't. Maybe I should. Okay, what was Lincoln's war strategy? Remember, he was not a general. He had no military experience. He was a politician. And he depended on veterans of the Army. And Winfield Scott was his first military advisor when he first got there. Winfield Scott was an old man, way overweight, near the end of his life, but he put together a pretty good strategy. 3 parts. First was the naval blockade of the southern ports, cut off their trade. Remember, they got their money from selling cotton to European countries. So they want to cut that off, and also cut off any foreign countries from coming in and helping the South. That was a major strategy of the South throughout the war, was try to get other European countries to come help them. But as far as I know, no European countries were willing to do that. They saw this as a civil war, and it'd be best to stay out of the way. The second part of the strategy is control the Mississippi River, split the Confederacy east to west, and disrupt their supply line. Remember, in the 1860s, a lot of supplies were sent by river. Railroads and river. The North had the most railroads, and the rivers, if they could control them, they would control the supply lines. And the third part of the strategy was encircle and squeeze. Slowly tighten the grip, the Northern Army, on the southern states. Had several key military objectives. First was to capture Richmond, which was the capital. Richmond, Virginia was just south of Washington, D.C. The second objective, along those same lines, they'd have to defeat the Army of Northern Virginia, which was led by General Robert E. Lee. The first part of the war, Robert E. Lee won all his battles because he had Stonewall Jackson as one of his assistants. And Stonewall Jackson was just awesome. But he was accidentally shot by one of his own men and died. And from then on, Lee had trouble winning the battles. And the third military objective was unconditional surrender. Why is that important? Well, the Democrats, after several years of the war, they were called Copperhead Democrats. That was their nickname. And they're the ones saying, this is too much. We can't, let's do a compromise. Let's figure out a way to end this war with a compromise. And they ran a candidate in 1864 who actually was one of Lincoln's fired generals, McClellan. And that was their strategy. They were going to try to make peace with the South and end this war. Too much killing. And Lincoln said, nothing but unconditional surrender will satisfy the Republicans and my administration. He had more political and moral dimension of the war. He wanted to preserve the border states, which was Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, and Delaware. And during the war, West Virginia came out of the western counties of Virginia, which were more Union supportive. So he wanted to preserve those. And one of the things he did to do that was in his second term, he was reelected in 1864. He got rid of Hannibal Hamlin as his vice president and put in Andrew Johnson, who was from Tennessee, which part of Tennessee was a border state, and part of it was not. He became the second vice president. And as we're going to see, that did not turn out to be a good idea. But it was part of this plan to preserve the border states, keep them either out of the war or on the Union side. At the inauguration, Johnson showed up drunk as a skunk. Unbelievable. How would you ever do that? But he did. And as you're going to see, he did some other bad things after Lincoln died when he became president. The next moral dimension of the war was that Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, 1863, which freed the slaves in the southern states. Transformed us from to save the Union to free the slaves. So obviously, freeing the slaves in the South could have no power unless the Union won the battles and took over the Southern governments. But it was obviously a very symbolic event. We had some reaction to that. New York City had the draft riots where the Irish and other white New York City people saying, wait a minute, we're not going to fight you can't draft us to fight the war to free the blacks. We don't like the blacks. So very political, very emotional thing for the Southern slaves and the abolitionists who wanted to do this all along. And Lincoln tried to maintain public support through speeches, letters, public appearances like the Gettysburg Address after the Battle of Gettysburg, dedicating the cemetery there 77 years ago. Remember that speech. All right, so the war lasted from 1861 to 1865. Like I said, the first couple years of the war, the South won all the battles. 2 battles of Bull Run is how that started out. That's the one where the Northern aristocrats showed up in their fancy carriages with the ladies dressed all prettily, and they wanted to watch this event. And once the bullets and cannons started firing, they took off like scared rabbits. And that's kind of how the early war went. It wasn't until Antietam and Gettysburg that the Union started to win some battles. But Lincoln got frustrated with his generals because they were just so hesitant to engage in battle. McClellan was the main general during the first part of the war, and he liked to train his men and train them, but never actually fight. And Lincoln would go to his camp and say, when are you going to fight? And he said, well, when we're ready. But we're never ready. But he was the general during Antietam, which was the bloodiest day of the war. That's in Maryland. And Meade, Hooker, lost, I forget which battle Hooker was there. He was He was one that replaced McClellan, and he lost the battle, again, because he was too hesitant to attack. Meade won the Battle of Gettysburg, which was the turning point of the war. That's when Robert E. Lee's army crossed into Pennsylvania and met up with the Union Army at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I've been there. I've been to Antietam and Gettysburg. Like I said, Meade won the battle, but did not pursue Lee to put him out of action. He let him escape to go back to the South. And Lincoln, he got so tired of trying to get his generals to be more aggressive. Meanwhile, out west, Ulysses Grant was winning battles by being aggressive. He won the Battle of Vicksburg and Shiloh, Fort Henry, and that's where the Union was successful, out west, so trying to capture the Mississippi River. So Grant had a reputation, however, as a drinker, and but he was successful. And Lincoln said, "Well, if he is a drinker, he's winning. I need a winning general," and he made him head of the Eastern Army. And he put his underling, William Tecumseh Sherman, in charge of the Western armies and told him to march to the sea, go south, destroy all you see, defeat the southern armies, burn Atlanta, and head towards South Carolina. That was Sherman's march to the sea, a major part of the war. Union victories. My great-great-grandfather was on that campaign. Henry. Grant's overland campaign was just to go capture Richmond. Like I said, that was the original part of the plan. I've been to all those battle sites down from Antietam south to Richmond. What was Lincoln's post-war plan? Well, full pardon for the Confederates who pledged loyalty to the United States. The 10% plan was if you have 10% of your voters in a state, you could go ahead and elect a state government. 10% is all you needed. He would exclude high-ranking Confederate officials and those who were mistreated, the prisoners at Confederate prison camps. He was opposed to carpetbaggers who were Northerners who went south to take over the southern states. He opposed that. He wanted the South to lead their own states. He clashed with his own party on these ideas. His own party were called the Radical Republicans. They wanted stricter requirements. They wanted a 50% instead of a 10% loyalty oath, and Lincoln pocket vetoed that idea. They wanted black suffrage, and they wanted harsh punishments for the Confederate leaders. Well, what happened when Lincoln was assassinated in 1865? By the Constitution, his drunk Vice President Andrew Johnson from Tennessee took over, and he did not see things the same way. He was a Southerner, but he did not like the Southern aristocrats that started the war. But he was against anything to help the blacks. He wanted blanket pardons for most of the Confederacy. He opposed black suffrage. He rejected radical Republican input. He vetoed the Freedmen's Bureau bill, which would be freedmen's, that would be the free blacks. And he vetoed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Again, it would help the blacks coming out of the Civil War. Then he fired Edwin Stanton, who was Secretary of War under Lincoln, and that was the final step that the radical Republicans could not tolerate, so they voted to impeach him. He was the first president ever to be impeached. But like all the impeachments, none of them went all the way through. This one was close, though. He needed 36 votes in the Senate. He got, the radical Republicans got 35. 1 vote short of being removed from office. So now we're headed towards after the Civil War with Reconstruction, with Union armies in the South. And the Union armies would stay there until Rutherford B. Hayes's presidency, where he pulled them out. I've been to Rutherford B. Hayes' house in Ohio. Okay, so that ends the Civil War. Now we're going into the period of Reconstruction, black codes and Jim Crow laws, and things don't get much better for blacks in the South after the Civil War. I'm not sure what the next video is going to be, but I'll see you next time. Thank you.